Have you ever stopped to wonder whether the story you're living is actually yours, or just a script handed to you long ago, one you follow without question? From the moment we take our first breath, our minds begin spinning tales, not in books or journals, but deep within the fabric of our thoughts. Our brains are, by design, storytelling machines, constantly weaving narratives about who we are, what we're worth, where we belong, and what our experiences mean. And the wildest part? We rarely question them. These stories become the invisible scaffolding that shapes our lives, how we see the world, how we treat others, what we believe is possible, and who we think we're allowed to become. But what if the story you're living isn't really yours? What if it's been whispered into your mind over years by your parents, your culture, your past pain, and now you're just acting it out, day after day, as if it were some universal truth? Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, once posed a question that cuts to the core of human experience. What myth am I living? Not, what do I believe, or what do I want, but what myth? Because according to Jung, we all live according to deeply rooted myths, unconscious storylines that run in the background of our lives, quietly directing our behavior like invisible puppet strings. And here's the twist. Most of us have no idea what those stories are. Jung warned that if we don't know the myth we're living, we could be caught in a tragedy without even realizing it. We could be fighting battles that aren't ours to fight, chasing dreams that were never ours to begin with, or staying stuck in pain that we've come to identify with so deeply, we no longer remember who we were before it. Let's make this real. Picture someone who grew up being told that the world is harsh, that you have to toughen up or be eaten alive. They might not remember hearing those exact words, but the story sank in. As they grow, they begin to view every interaction through the lens of competition and danger. Relationships feel like battlegrounds. Vulnerability feels like weakness. Success means dominating. They're living out the myth of the warrior. It's not that this person is wrong. It's just that the story may no longer serve them. They might long for softness, connection, or peace. But the myth they live says those things are unsafe. Now imagine someone else who believes, deep down, that their worth is defined by love, by being chosen, desired, seen. They're living out the myth of the romantic. Their life becomes a series of love stories, heartbreaks, longing glances, emotional highs and lows. The presence of a partner becomes synonymous with happiness. But what happens when love is absent? Or when love isn't enough? This myth, too, can imprison as much as it inspires. These inner myths aren't just colorful metaphors. They're real forces. They shape how we perceive reality. Two people can walk into the same room and walk away with completely different stories because they're each wearing a different lens. One sees rejection, the other sees possibility. One sees threat, the other sees opportunity. The only difference? The story they're living. What makes this even trickier is that these stories are often quiet. Some are loud and obvious, the narratives we tell ourselves after a mistake, like, I'm such a failure, or I'll never get it right. But others are like background noise. We don't even notice them because they've always been there. Maybe we've been telling ourselves, I don't belong, or I'm not smart enough, for so long that the idea of questioning it feels absurd. And yet, these are not objective truths. They're just stories. And stories, by nature, can be revised. Many of us live under the weight of these inherited or absorbed myths. They might have formed from a single painful moment, 1,000 small comments, or a culture that praises certain traits while shaming others. Over time, they become part of our identity. We stop saying, I feel anxious, and start saying, I am anxious. We stop noticing the story and become the story. Brené Brown, a researcher and storyteller in her own right, speaks often about this danger. She says the most dangerous stories are the ones we tell ourselves, and worse, the ones we don't even realize we're telling. These inner narratives become self-fulfilling prophecies. If you believe you're unworthy, you'll approach relationships expecting rejection, interpreting neutral actions as judgment, and pulling away before anyone gets too close. And when someone eventually does leave, your brain says, "See? I told you so." This isn't just psychology, it's neuroscience. Our brains are wired for confirmation bias. We seek out and cling to information that aligns with what we already believe. If your myth is, "I'm not enough," your brain will ignore compliments and cling to criticisms. It will spotlight your mistakes and shadow your wins. You'll collect evidence to support the lie, never noticing all the truth that's right in front of you. So what happens when we start to challenge the story? What if, instead of defaulting to "I'm stuck," you ask, "What if I'm growing?" What if you stopped saying, "This is just who I am," and started saying, "Maybe I can evolve"? You'd begin to see things you never saw before. You'd make different choices. You'd show up with new energy. This isn't wishful thinking, it's the science of neuroplasticity. Our brains can rewire. But first, we need to interrupt the story. That means being brave enough to ask, whose story is this? Did I choose it? Is it helping me? Does it align with the person I want to become? For many of us, the answer is no. We've inherited myths that say success equals burnout, love equals sacrifice, worth equals achievement, or safety equals silence. And we follow these myths into jobs we hate, relationships that drain us, and patterns that feel impossible to break. But they're not impossible. They're just familiar. The beauty of stories is that they can evolve. You can learn to identify the old myths and replace them with new ones. More compassionate ones. More empowering ones. You can write yourself as the hero of your journey, not the victim of your past. You can stop being the person who's always left behind and become the person who chooses to walk forward. Not overnight, not without effort, but absolutely, undeniably, possibly. So take a moment. Look at your life like a script. The choices you've made, the roles you've taken on, the things you keep chasing or running from. What's the story behind those patterns? Are you living the myth of the martyr? Always sacrificing, always giving, always exhausted? Are you caught in the myth of the outsider? Believing you'll never truly belong, no matter how hard you try? Are you replaying the myth of the perfectionist, where anything less than flawless equals failure? The myth you live is not your fate, it's your current narrative. And narratives can shift. You are not the voice that tells you you're not enough. You are the one hearing that voice. And you have the power to question it, to rewrite it, and to speak a new one into being. The question Jung asked isn't just profound, it's urgent. What myth are you living? And if it's not one you chose, isn't it time to write a new one? Most people don't realize they're living out a myth. Not the kind found in ancient texts or heroic legends, but a deeply embedded narrative, one that quietly shapes their thoughts, emotions, relationships, and decisions. These myths are like invisible operating systems running in the background of our lives. We inherit them, absorb them, and then reinforce them, often without questioning their origin or validity. They form the blueprint of our mental and emotional architecture, offering patterns we follow over and over again because they feel familiar. They feel true. But here's the thing, just because something feels true doesn't mean it is true. Once a belief takes hold in the psyche, it becomes more than a thought. It becomes a filter. Our minds naturally seek consistency, so when we believe something, especially something painful or limiting, we start unconsciously scanning the world for evidence to support that belief. This is called confirmation bias, and it's powerful. Take the belief, "I'm unlovable." Once that myth takes root, Everything gets interpreted through its lens. A compliment? Probably just pity. A kind gesture? Must be manipulative. An invitation? Maybe they felt obligated. Anything that contradicts the myth is dismissed, downplayed, or twisted into something that reinforces it. Over time, this feedback loop solidifies the story even further until it becomes the foundation of your identity. What's even more startling is that most of this happens beneath the surface. We don't walk around saying, "Here's the myth I'm living today." We just react to situations, to people, to challenges in ways that reflect our inner narratives. As Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That quote isn't just poetic, it's a warning. If you don't pause to examine the story that's been directing your life, you'll keep repeating the same patterns and calling it destiny. Think about that for a second. How many times have you chalked something up to bad luck, bad timing, or fate when it was really a result of a belief you never chose but have been living out anyway? This is why the question, "What myth am I living?" is so essential. It isn't just philosophical. It's practical. It's personal. It's a doorway to self-awareness, and self-awareness is the foundation of any meaningful change. Without it, we're not really in control. We're simply reacting to life, playing out scripts written by past experiences, cultural conditioning, and inherited beliefs. But once we ask the question, once we begin to investigate the myth, we shift from being passive characters in a story to becoming conscious authors of our own narrative. And here's the beautiful part. The story can be rewritten. In therapeutic circles, this process is often called reframing. It's the practice of taking a thought, belief, or memory that once hurt you or limited you and giving it new meaning. This doesn't mean lying to yourself or pretending everything is fine. It means acknowledging the reality of what happened while also choosing a more empowering interpretation of what it means. For example, instead of telling yourself, "I'm bad at this," you shift to, "I'm still learning." It's a subtle change, but the impact is massive. Instead of seeing yourself as incapable, you now see yourself as someone in progress, someone growing. Instead of assuming, "They don't like me," you reframe it as, "Maybe they're just having a tough day." This creates room for compassion for yourself and others. Reframing helps us develop a more balanced, realistic, and empowering way of engaging with the world, especially when dealing with situations or people we can't control. Because here's the truth. Much of our suffering doesn't come from life itself. It comes from the story our mind tells us about life. We think we're hurting because of what happened, but often the pain is rooted in the meaning we assign to it. And meaning is malleable. We can change it. Stories have that kind of power. They can break us, or they can build us. They can keep us stuck in cycles of shame, fear, and limitation, or they can propel us toward healing, growth, and liberation. Carl Jung understood this intimately. In his reflections, he wrote, "I did not know that I was living a myth, and even if I had known it, I would not have known what sort of myth was ordering my life." He went on to describe how this realization that a hidden narrative had been shaping his choices became the task of tasks. If he couldn't see the personal myth that guided his own mind, how could he fully understand the inner worlds of his patients? How could he truly offer help if he didn't first uncover the unconscious stories shaping his own behavior? This self-exploration became the cornerstone of his work, and it's the invitation we all face. To know the myth, to question it, to, if necessary, dismantle it and build a new one. Mythologist Joseph Campbell, whose work on the hero's journey transformed the way we understand storytelling, suggested that every person lives out their own unique version of this universal pattern. The hero's journey begins with a call to adventure, a disruption of the ordinary, a whisper that something more awaits. Then comes the departure, the trials, the inner battles, the moments of despair, and eventually, the return, with hard-earned wisdom and a transformed self. And here's the thing, asking, what myth am I living, is itself a call to adventure. It's a challenge to step out of the known, to face your dragons, your fears, doubts, and outdated beliefs, and begin the journey back to yourself. A deeper, truer self. The self that isn't bound by old narratives, but is free to create new ones. But this kind of self-inquiry isn't easy. It's uncomfortable. It can be painful. Many people avoid it because it requires confronting parts of themselves they'd rather ignore. The wounds, the shame, the limiting beliefs they've quietly carried for years. It's far easier to stay in the familiar myth, even if it causes suffering, than to risk the unknown. But growth never happens in comfort. Transformation only happens when we're willing to face what's hidden and ask if it still belongs. Every meaningful change in life starts with a question, a moment of pause, a flicker of doubt about something we once accepted as fact. That doubt is sacred. It's the beginning of freedom. When you start to question your myth, you unlock the door to possibility, to reinvention, to choosing a different path. And this isn't just poetic theory. Research in narrative therapy backs this up. Studies have shown that when individuals are guided to explore and rewrite their personal narratives, the effects on mental health are profound. People begin to feel more agency, more hope, and more clarity. They feel less like victims of circumstance and more like active participants in their lives. They begin to understand that they are not defined by their past, but by the meaning they choose to give it. They shift from living out a story they inherited to consciously creating one that reflects who they truly are. That's the power of self-awareness. That's the gift of the question, what myth am I living? It has the potential to change everything. It unveils the patterns you didn't know were running the show. It brings unconscious motivations into the light. It allows you to challenge assumptions you've never questioned and make choices you didn't think you had. It frees you from the invisible chains of old identities and invites you into a new kind of authorship, where your story reflects your truth, your values, your becoming. This is how a life becomes authentic, not by default, but by design. Because when you start living consciously, when your life is no longer a set of reactions dictated by inherited myths, but a series of intentional choices, everything changes. You stop settling. You start listening. You align with your real self. And that's not just a new chapter. That's a whole new book. So ask yourself, today, tomorrow, over and over again, what myth am I living? And if the answer doesn't serve you, rewrite it. You have the pen now. Because in the end, the most powerful story you'll ever tell is the one you tell yourself about who you are, why you're here, and what's possible for you. Let that story be one worth living.